Generative artificial intelligence has unlocked unprecedented opportunities for creativity. It has also armed malicious actors with powerful new tools, lowering the barrier for entry for complex forms of cybercrime and creating new threats for public safety. The tragic case of Elijah Heacock, a 16-year-old from Kentucky whose death in February 2025 became a national inflection point, illustrates the devastating human cost of AI-driven financial sextortion. This is the disturbing world of AI sextortion. Let's get spooky. Hey, spooky people. It's your best friend Kenny here, and we are back with another spooky, disturbing story. Before we get to today's story, let's make sure that you like and share this video. Share this video with the HVAC guy. It's summer, it's blistering hot, and I'm sure he's busy as hell and he needs something to do when he's on his break. Nothing better than some spooky, disturbing stories, right? I would appreciate it. Eli Heacock was, by all accounts, the opposite of a troubled teen. His parents, Shannon Heacock and John Burnett, described him as a smart, happy kid. He had a vibrant, energetic presence. He made people smile. He was a sophomore at Caverna High School in Glasgow, Kentucky, where he was deeply involved in academic and social activities. I don't know whether it's Glasgow or Glasgow. I'm going to pronounce it Glasgow because that's the correct Scottish pronunciation. And if I'm wrong, feel free to roast me in the comments. Friends and family knew him as a class clown, possessing a crazy sense of humor and a creative spirit that manifested in playful antics such as making swords out of pool noodles for sporting events or being a vocal supporter at school basketball games. He was an athlete, participating in tennis and track and field, and he had previously played football. He was a member of the Academic Beta Club and served as the vice president of the school's chapter of Jobs for America's Graduates, showing that he had leadership potential. His father noted that Eli was excited about his future, looking forward to getting his driver's license and participating in upcoming sports seasons. He was a twin to his sister, Palin, one of 5 siblings in a close-knit family, and was considered a best friend to his father. Beneath this exterior of a happy, well-adjusted young man, Eli privately struggled with significant health challenges. He lived with an array of rare diseases, including eosinophilic esophagitis and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which was severe enough to require him to use a feeding tube. This was a part of his life he kept intensely private, known to few outside his immediate family. His father explained that Eli walked right past it because he didn't want to be known for that. He wanted to be known for Eli, not the kid with these diseases. This quiet resilience and determination to define himself on his own terms speaks about how he was as a person. It also provides context for the events that follow. Sextortion success often hinges on a victim's profound fear of social ruin and public shame. For a teenager like Eli, who is socially active, well-liked, and invested in his reputation, the threat of having that reputation destroyed would have been catastrophic. The qualities that defined him as a normal, thriving adolescent, his friendship, his school activities, his social standing, made him an ideal target. The more a victim has to lose socially, the greater the perpetrator's psychological leverage becomes. This dynamic refutes common but misguided narratives that focus on at-risk youth. In the world of AI-driven sextortion, is often the most socially integrated who are the most vulnerable. The events that led to Elijah Heacock's death happened quickly on the night of February 27th and the morning of February 28th, 2025. The evening started off as normal. At around 10:30 p.m., Eli spoke with his mother, and they had plans to get coffee together the next day. Shortly thereafter, the attack began. Eli received an anonymous, unsettling text message containing what appeared to be nude photographs of himself. These images were, in fact, completely fabricated, created using generative artificial intelligence. The message was accompanied by a threat. The sender demanded $3,000, or the images would be sent to his friends and family. Thrown into a state of panic, Eli acted with the desperation of a trapped teenager. He sent a text message to his best friend, Harrison, asking to borrow money. Harrison was unaware of the reason and only had $8 in his Cash App at the time. Eli also managed to get $50 from an older brother and sent this small sum to the extortionist. The perpetrator's response was swift and merciless. This is not enough. This exchange, from initial contact to the final dismissive threat, took place in a short period of time. Within 1 hour of receiving the first message, overwhelmed by fear and shame, Eli Heacock unalived himself. We don't know whether Eli knew the images were fake, However, this ambiguity points to a fundamental and terrifying aspect of deepfake technology's role in extortion. The line between what is authentic and what is fabricated has become irrelevant to the psychological impact of the crime. The victim is ensnared in a devastating psychological trap. Even if a victim knows an image is a fabrication, they can't be certain that their peers, family, or community will believe them, especially when confronted with a hyper-realistic depiction. The shame stems not just from a potential past action, but from the public accusation itself. The plausibility of the image, not its factual basis, becomes the weapon. The perpetrator leverages the victim's fear of social judgment in a digital world where seeing is no longer believing, but can also still be condemning. The horror of that night continued as Eli's twin sister, Palin, went to check on him and made the devastating discovery. First responders rushed him to TJ Sampson Community Hospital in Glasgow, and he was later airlifted to a trauma center at the University of Louisville, where he died the next morning. In the sterile, anxious environment of the hospital, the mystery behind his sudden act of desperation began to unravel. While at his bedside, his parents, John Burnett and Shannon Heacock, found the series of disturbing messages and AI-generated photos on his phone. In that moment, they understood what happened. Their grief would be compounded by the intrusion of a criminal investigation. At the hospital, a detective from the Barron County Sheriff's Office reviewed the messages and recognized the hallmarks of a sophisticated sextortion scheme, stating that the FBI needed to be brought into the case. The escalation underscored the severity and likely interstate and international nature of the crime. For Eli's parents, the term sextortion was entirely new. They, like so many others, were unaware of this specific and evolving threat. In the wake of their unimaginable loss, Shannon Heacock and John Burnett made a courageous decision. They transformed their private grief into a public crusade for awareness and legislative change. Their story resonated across the country, appearing in national news reports and on social media platforms. They spoke with raw honesty about their experience, hoping to prevent other families from suffering the same fate. John Burnett's assessment of the perpetrators encapsulates the modern challenge. The people that are after our children are well organized, they are well financed, and they are relentless. They don't need the photos to be real. They can generate whatever they want, and then they use it to blackmail the child. He stated, "The enemy is upgraded," and that's the central thesis of this crisis, which signals a fundamental shift in the landscape of online safety. Elijah Heacock's tragedy became the catalyst for a national conversation, forcing society to confront a new, insidious form of technologically enabled violence. The scheme that led to Elijah Heacock's death was not an isolated act of a lone predator, but an example of a new, industrialized form of cybercrime. The advent of accessible and powerful generative AI has fundamentally altered the operational model of sextortion, transforming it from a crime that often required intricate social engineering to one that could be used against anyone at any time with frightening efficiency. Understanding the technical and financial mechanics of this new criminal enterprise is essential to developing effective remedies. The modern AI-driven sextortion attack doesn't begin with a conversation, but with data harvesting. Criminals systemically scrape public-facing social media profiles on platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter to gather innocent photographs of their potential victims. These images, often profile pictures, photos with family vacation snapshots, become the raw material for the fabrication. Once these photos are obtained, the images are fed into widely available generative AI tools. These can range from so-called nudify apps to more sophisticated deepfake algorithms, which often utilize machine learning framework known as generative adversarial network. In a GAN, two neural networks, a generator and a discriminator, work in opposition. The generator creates fake media, and the discriminator attempts to defy it as fake. Through millions of cycles, the generator becomes progressively better at creating hyper-realistic forgeries that can fool the discriminator and, by extension, the human eye. This technology allows perpetrators to seamlessly superimpose a victim's face onto pre-existing explicit material, creating a composite image that appears disturbingly authentic. A critical element of this new criminal racket is its accessibility. Perpetrators no longer require specialized knowledge or advanced technical skills to create this harmful content. The proliferation of open source software, cloud-based AI services, and user-friendly applications has dramatically lowered the barrier to entry. You don't need any actual technical skills to create this type of material. A simple online search can lead to a potential abuser to the necessary tools, giving the ability to produce convincing deepfakes for malicious purposes to anyone. The individuals and groups behind these schemes are not amateurs. They are well organized, well financed, and relentless. Their operations have evolved into what blockchain analysis firm TRM Labs calls the industrialization of exploitation, where criminal networks function with established playbooks for targeting, threatening, and extracting payment from victims. This model is designed to be low cost, high yield, and resilient. The financial infrastructure of these schemes is designed for speed and anonymity. Demands are typically made for money, often in the form of gift cards or cryptocurrency, which offers a degree of anonymity that complicates law enforcement's ability to trace the funds. In Eli's case, the demand was for $3,000. While cryptocurrency is a favored tool, analysis of some sextortion rings reveal that their financial operations can be surprisingly unsophisticated. TRM Labs has observed cases where ransom payments were sent to crypto addresses that weren't well hidden, including some that led directly to deposit addresses at centralized exchanges. This suggests that some criminal groups prioritize the speed and ease of cashing out over complex money laundering techniques. This simplicity is a sign of the crime's accessibility and also presents a potential vulnerability. These direct links to regulated financial entities like exchanges create critical choke points where timely reporting could enable investigators to intervene and identify the perpetrator. The model has been refined to maximize psychological pressure while minimizing the perpetrator's effort. The ability to generate fake content removes the act of extortion from the high-risk, time-intensive process of grooming a victim to obtain real images. In traditional sextortion, a perpetrator might engage in a romance scam, building a relationship over time to solicit authentic explicit material. This grooming phase acts as a natural bottleneck, requiring skill, patience, and direct interaction. AI-powered fabrication shatters this bottleneck. The perpetrator not only needs a publicly available photograph to begin, they only need your Facebook profile, or your Twitter profile, or your IG. This shift allows the crime to scale exponentially, moving from a one-to-one interaction model to a one-to-many broadcast-style model. Law enforcement and platform safety teams are no longer just hunting individual predators. They are confronting organized criminal enterprises that operate with the scale and efficiency of mass marketing phishing or spam campaigns. Eli's case shows the shift in the nature of online exploitation. Historically, sextortion was a crime of coercion, predicated on the offender obtaining real sexually explicit material from a victim, either voluntarily through deception or involuntarily through hacking. The threat was to release something authentic. In this model, the new model, thanks to generative AI, it's a crime of fabrication. The photos don't need to be real. This evolution means that the line between what is authentic and what is fabricated is now increasingly irrelevant from the perspective of the crime's effectiveness. The psychological leverage, the fear, the shame, the threat of social ruin remains identical whether the image is real or fake. This development has rendered traditional online safety advice tragically insufficient. For years, the primary message to teenagers has been a behavioral one. Don't share nudes. This advice, while still good advice, by the way, is no longer a shield. Eli's case and the mechanics of AI-driven sextortion demonstrate that a victim can be targeted even if they have followed this rule and have never created or shared a single explicit image of themselves. This reality creates a pivot in how society approaches online safety. The locus of responsibility and prevention must expand. Responsibility for prevention must expand. While personal digital hygiene remains important, it's no longer sufficient. The focus must shift from an emphasis on user behavior to a more holistic strategy that includes platform architecture, putting together measures to prevent automated scraping of user images, protecting our data, which is something that we have been arguing with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter forever now. It requires ethical artificial intelligence developers who build safeguards into the core of general models. And it requires enhanced law enforcement capabilities, which means developing the forensic and financial tools to disrupt these criminal enterprises. The enemy is upgraded, the response has to upgrade as well. The increase in popularity of AI-driven financial sextortion has revealed a surprising and disturbing pattern of victimization. While online sexual exploitation has historically been associated primarily with female victims, the new wave of crime disproportionately targets adolescent boys. Data from leading child safety and law enforcement organizations paint a clear and alarming picture. The FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the NCMEC, have both identified teenage boys, typically between the ages of 14 and 17, as the primary targets of financial sextortion schemes. The scale of this crisis is staggering and growing exponentially. In 2022, the NCMEC's cyber tip line received 10,731 reports of financial sextortion. By 2023, that number had surged nearly 150% to 26,718. The consequences of these crimes are dire. The FBI estimated that since 2021, at least 20 young people have unalived themselves as a direct result of sextortion scams. Don't call these just statistics. They represent the lives of people like Elijah Heacock. The perpetrators of these schemes are not targeting individuals with pre-existing mental health conditions. As Tampa-based psychologist Dr. Anna Schrack has noted, the kids who are being targeted often don't have mental health concerns. They're happy, resilient kids enjoying school and life. This underscores the fact that the vulnerability lies not in pre-existing pathology, but in the universal psychological pressures of adolescence itself. Teenagers are developmentally primed for victimization by these schemes. The adolescent brain is in a period of intense development, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control, long-term planning, and risk assessment. As a result, teenagers are naturally more susceptible to peer pressure, have a lower perception of risk, and are actively trying to figure out their identity, often by trying on different identities to see what works in the digital realm. They may not possess the life experience to distinguish between genuine online interaction and a predatory one, putting their trust in the wrong situations. These perpetrators are skilled at exploiting these teenage vulnerabilities through a process of grooming and manipulation, even in the compressed timeline of an AI-driven attack. They may use fake profiles to pose as peers or catfishing, build a rapid but false sense of trust through flattery and shared interests, and then quickly pivot to the demands. In this scam, teenage boys face a unique set of psychological pressures for criminals to exploit. The crime's success hinges on the victim's silence. The societal constructs of masculinity create a barrier to asking for help. Boys are often socialized to suppress emotions or signs of vulnerability. The prospect of admitting to being a victim of a sexual crime, even one based on fabricated images, can trigger intense feelings of embarrassment and shame. They fear being blamed, being seen as stupid for falling for a scam, or having their masculinity questioned. This fear of social judgment isolates the victim, preventing them from seeking help from parents, teachers, and friends, the very action that could save their life. The perpetrator is not just exploiting a teenager, they're exploiting a deeply ingrained gendered script that equates vulnerability with weakness. This makes prevention efforts that fail to address these harmful gender norms incomplete. Any effective strategy must include direct conversations with boys that destigmatize victimization and reframe seeking help as an act of strength and courage. I have struggled my entire life asking for help. And I know a lot of other people, a lot of other men who feel the same way. It's not weakness to ask for help. If you need help, ask for help. I cannot stress this enough. The psychological impact of sextortion is severe. Victims are plunged into a state of intense anxiety, depression, fear, and hopelessness. The threat of having their reputation destroyed and their private life exposed to their entire social world creates a sense of being trapped with no way out. This is not a slow-burning crisis. It's an explosion of psychological distress that can lead to self-harm or unaliving with terrifying speed. The case of Elijah Heacock, where the entire tragic sequence from initial contact to death unfolded in about an hour, shows this immediacy. It renders traditional reactive support systems obsolete. There's often not enough time for a parent to notice behavioral changes, for a social counselor to intervene, or for the victim to overcome their own internal barriers of fear and shame to report the incident. The entire concept of child safety must therefore shift from a reactive model, waiting for a child to report a problem, to a proactive one. This requires preemptive education about the specific nature of these threats, fostering an environment of unconditional trust where a child feels safe disclosing a threat immediately and equipping them with a pre-planned emergency escape route, who to call, what to do, before a crisis ever materializes. The use of AI-generative deepfakes adds another layer of unique trauma. The victim is confronted with a hyper-realistic depiction of themselves in a compromising situation they know is false. This creates a profound sense of cognitive dissonance and confusion. The fear is not just of being shamed for something they did, but of being condemned for something they didn't do, and the terror that no one will believe their denial. This experience can erode a child's trust in the world and in the people around them, creating a sense of isolation and helplessness. The crime attacks not only their reputation, but their very sense of reality and their faith in their support system. The emergence of AI-driven sextortion as a widespread criminal enterprise is a challenge to law enforcement agencies at the local, state, and federal levels. The crime's technological sophistication, international nature, and the speed with which it can lead to tragic outcomes require a highly specialized response. The investigation into Elijah Heacock's death provides a window into both the response procedure priorities and the difficulties of bringing the perpetrators of this new form of violence to justice. The FBI made Elijah Heacock's death a priority from the moment that the crime was identified. The decision by the Barron County Sheriff's Office at the hospital to immediately involve the FBI showed that they understood that this was not a simple local matter, but a complex cybercrime that likely crossed state and even international lines. The FBI's swift engagement confirmed the case's status as a federal priority. One of the most critical investigative actions took place in the immediate aftermath at the hospital. An FBI agent on the scene recognized the signs of a sextortion scheme and took the crucial step of placing Elijah's phone into airplane mode. This seemingly simple action was vital for preserving the digital evidence. It severed the device's connection to any network, preventing the perpetrators from remotely wiping the phone's contents and destroying the primary record of the crime. The digital golden hour of evidence preservation is critical. The phone contained the entire chronicle of the attack, the threatening messages, the AI-generated images, the financial demands, and potentially crucial metadata, such as account identifiers or IP address fragments that could provide a trail to the criminals. Public awareness campaigns and first responder training must emphasize the non-technical but time-sensitive action to give investigators any chance of success. The FBI considers Eli's case a homicide, operating under the premise that the sextortionist actions were the direct and proximate cause of Eli's death. And the family shares their view, hoping that the persons or people responsible will ultimately be charged with murder. The investigation being conducted jointly by federal and local authorities is ongoing, with forensic analysis of the phone's contents. The FBI has indicated to the family that they believe a network of individuals, not just a single lone actor, was likely involved, pointing to the organized nature of the crime. The investigation also highlights the jurisdictional difficulties inherent in these cases. The crime originated from an anonymous digital source. The perpetrators are likely part of an international network, and the financial trail may be deliberately convoluted. A public statement from Shannon Heacock revealed a potential lead. A financial mule, an intermediary used to move illicit funds, was identified in Texas. However, she also expressed frustration that Texas authorities had been reluctant to press charges against this individual, a situation that shows the legal and procedural hurdles that can arise even in domestic multi-state investigations. There's a conflict between the borderless nature of the crime and the geographically bound structure of law enforcement, and this can create holes where accountability can be lost. Eli Heacock's case is a single tragic example of a nationwide epidemic. FBI Louisville has confirmed it is dedicating specific resources to investigating the surge in sextortion cases in the region. At the state level, the Kentucky State Police have arrested over 300 offenders in connection with sextortion since 2019, indicating a sustained effort to combat the threat. Across agencies, the advice to victims and their families is as follows. Do not pay. Do not pay the person. Complying with demands for money or more images will not stop the blackmail. It emboldens the perpetrator and leads to escalating demands. Do not delete. Victims should immediately block the perpetrator, but must not delete the messages, images, or profiles. The digital evidence is crucial for the investigation. Report it immediately. The most important step is to contact law enforcement, specifically FBI, without delay. Many families are unaware what to do, or victims fear they will get in trouble. Law enforcement officials stress that the child is the victim of a crime, not the perpetrator. The FBI and partner organizations like the NCMC can provide critical support, including working with technological platforms to get the offending images removed from the internet and launching an investigation to pursue the criminals. However, these investigations face challenges. Perpetrators are often based overseas, beyond the direct reach of U.S. law. They use anonymizing technologies, encrypted communication platforms, and cryptocurrency transactions to obscure their identities and financial trails, making them exceedingly difficult to track and prosecute. An effective response will require not only new domestic laws, but also a significant investment in strengthening international treaties, streamlining data sharing agreements, and fostering a global consensus on policing these transnational crimes. A crucial aspect of law enforcement response has been the clear and consistent position that AI-generated abusive material is illegal. Legally and ethically, there is no distinction. AI-generative CSAM is still CSAM. An indecent image of a minor generated by AI is classified as a child abuse image, regardless of its synthetic origin. The United States Department of Justice has reinforced this stance through aggressive prosecution, demonstrating that existing federal laws can be applied to these new technological methods. Federal authorities have recently brought charges in cases involving purely AI-generated CSAM, where the children depicted were entirely virtual, as well as in cases where perpetrators used AI tools to digitally alter innocent pictures of real children into sexually explicit images. For example, a North Carolina child psychiatrist was convicted under federal law for using an AI application to undress photos of young girls. Oh my God. And Wisconsin software engineer was charged for using an AI model to create photorealistic CSAM. These cases send an unequivocal message that the method of creation does not absolve the creator of criminal liability. The Department of Justice maintains that it has the legal tools necessary to prosecute these offenses and is committed to using them aggressively. The death of Elijah Heacock and thousands of similar cases of exploitation have thrown a harsh spotlight on a legal and regulatory framework that is struggling to keep pace with this technological change. The rapid evolution of AI has created a new landscape of risk that existing laws, and particularly those governing internet platform liability, were not designed to address. And this has triggered a flurry of legislative activity at both the state and federal levels, creating a complex, contested, and rapidly shifting legal battlefield where fundamental principles of online accountability are being redrawn. At the heart of the debate over platform liability is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. And the fact that it's 1996 tells you a lot, right? 1996 was like the heyday of AOL. Section 230's primary purpose was to foster the growth of online platforms by providing them with a legal shield. The statute declares that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. This effectively immunizes platforms from a wide range of lawsuits based on content created by their users, treating them as mere distributors, like a bookstore, rather than publishers, like a newspaper, with editorial liability. Over the years, courts have interpreted this immunity broadly. The landmark ruling in Zarin versus American Online establishes a powerful precedent, shielding platforms from liability even when they have knowledge of harmful or defamatory content and fail to remove it. Critics argue that this expansive interpretation has deleterious effects, creating a moral hazard that allows platforms to avoid accountability for negligently or knowingly facilitating harm, prioritizing growth and engagement over user safety. In 2023, the Supreme Court had an opportunity to revisit this precedent in Gonzalez versus Google, a case concerning whether platforms could be held liable for algorithmically performing terrorist content. The court ultimately sidestepped a direct ruling on Section 230's scope, leaving the broad immunity largely intact and intensifying calls from across the political spectrum for Congress to step in and reform the law. In the absence of decisive federal action, states have begun to legislate on their own, creating fragmented patchwork laws aimed at combating AI-generated CSAM and sextortion. Eli's case was a powerful catalyst for local action. In the direct aftermath of Eli's death, the Kentucky legislature moved swiftly to pass Senate Bill 73, signed into law by Governor Andy Beshear. This bill makes financial sextortion a felony in the state and critically allows for the crime to be charged as a homicide if the victim dies by unaliving as a result. This response is part of a much broader national trend. According to research by the organization Enough Abuse, as of April 2025, a remarkable 38 states have enacted laws that in some way criminalize AI-generated or computer-edited CSAM. More than half of these laws were passed in 2024 alone, a clear indication of the urgency with which state legislators are treating the issue. However, the substance of these laws varies significantly, creating potential confusion and complicating the enforcement of the laws. Some states, like California, have passed detailed statutes that explicitly name and define AI-generated material. Others use broader or more ambiguous language, criminalizing material that is morphed or reproduced or produced by electronic means, which may or may not be interpreted by courts to cover purely synthetic content. This inconsistency underscores the challenge of relying on a state-by-state approach and strengthens the argument for a clear and uniform standard. Along with state efforts, the U.S. Congress has been debating significant federal legislation. One such piece of legislation is the Take It Down Act, Championed by public figures and enjoying bipartisan support, this act aims to create the first federal criminal penalties for publishing non-consensual, explicit imagery, including both real and AI-generated deepfakes. A key provision mandates that online platforms and websites must remove such content within 48 hours of receiving a request from the victim. This act is complemented by the NCMCE's Take It Down service, a tool that allows individuals to anonymously request the removal of their explicit images from participating platforms. A more comprehensive and contentious piece of legislation is the Strengthening Transparency and Obligations to Protect Children Suffering from Abuse and Mistreatment Act of 2025, or the Stop CSAM Act of 2025. This major bipartisan bill, introduced by Senators Josh Hawley and Dick Durbin, represents a sweeping attempt to overhaul platform accountability for child exploitation. Its key provisions include mandatory reporting and transparency. The act would significantly strengthen the existing duty for providers to report apparent CSAM to the NCMEC's cyber tip line. It shortens the reporting window to 60 days, specifies a long list of data that must be included in the report, such as IP addresses and user account information, and establishes hefty criminal and civil penalties for non-compliance, with fines reaching up to $1 million or more. It also mandates that large tech companies submit detailed annual transparency reports to the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission. The most transformative part of the bill is the creation of a new federal civil remedy that would allow victims of child exploitation to sue interactive computer service providers and app stores directly for damages. The bill establishes liability for intentional, knowing, or reckless promotion or facilitation of child exploitation, or the intentional, knowing, or reckless hosting of CSAM. The Act explicitly states that the immunity provided by Section 230 shall not be construed to impair or limit any claims brought under this new provision, effectively creating a major carve-out from the long-standing liability shield. The bill provides an affirmative defense for providers who can prove they removed the offending material within a reasonable time frame, like 48 hours, or that it was technologically impossible to do so without compromising encryption. It also includes provisions to sanction victims or their attorneys for filing bad faith lawsuits, a measure intended to deter frivolous litigation. The quick writing of these state and federal laws demonstrates a political and legal system scrambling to respond to technological reality that has far outpaced our existing laws. Being reactive creates a risk of legal uncertainty, which in turn fuels the push for a federal comprehensive standard. At the center of this push is the debate over the liability standard itself. The inclusion of the word reckless in the Stop CSAM Act has become a central battleground, a single term upon which the future balance of platform accountability, child safety, digital privacy, and the viability of secure communication technologies may rest. The legislative rush to address the horrors of AI-driven sextortion has ignited an intense policy debate. At its core is the tension between two deeply held societal values: the necessity of protecting children from harm and the foundational principles of privacy, security, and free speech in the digital age. This conflict is not a simple choice between good and evil, but a complex balancing act with important implications. The debate over the Stop CSAM Act has become the primary arena for this clash, pitting child safety advocates against a coalition of civil liberties organizations in a high-stakes battle over the future of the internet. From the perspective of child safety organizations like the NCMEC, as well as victims' families like Eli's family, the current legal landscape is not enough. They argue that the broad immunity granted to tech platforms under Section 230 has created a system that fails to protect children and allows companies to profit from business models that enable exploitation. For decades, victims have faced enormous barriers to justice, with platforms often hiding behind the liability shield to avoid accountability. These advocates see bills like the Stop CSAM Act as a long overdue corrective action. They argue that by creating a new civil right of action and lowering the liability standard to include reckless behavior, the legislature would finally create meaningful incentives for tech companies to proactively invest in safety. The goal is to fundamentally shift the economic calculus. Instead of victims in society bearing the cost of online harm, the burden would be placed on the multi-billion-dollar platforms that, in their view, have the resources and technological capability to prevent it. The ability for a victim to sue a platform that recklessly hosted or promoted content that led to their abuse is seen as a crucial tool for both individual justice and systemic change. It empowers survivors and puts the responsibility squarely where it belongs, on the platforms and institutions capable of stopping the spread of this material. In opposition, a coalition of civil liberties groups, including the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, and the Center for Democracy and Technology, the CDT, argue that the Stop CSAM Act, while it's well-intentioned, is a deeply flawed and dangerous piece of legislation that threatens the fundamental architecture of a secure and open internet. Their primary concern revolves around the threat to end-to-end encryption. They contend that the bill's vague and broad liability standard, particularly the inclusion of the word reckless, would make it legally perilous for companies to offer encrypted services, because end-to-end encryption makes it technologically impossible for a provider to see the content of user communications. Therefore, a plaintiff could argue that offering such a private service is inherently reckless, as it prevents the platform from monitoring for CSAM. To avoid a tidal wave of potentially ruinous lawsuits, providers would be incentivized to weaken or abandon encryption altogether, effectively building surveillance capabilities into their products. This, in their view, would break the tools that keep us safe and undermine the digital security of every internet user, from journalists and activists to ordinary people. Further, they argue that creating new exceptions to Section 230 would have a significant chilling effect on free speech. Fearing litigation, platforms would likely engage in overcautious and aggressive censorship, removing vast amounts of perfectly legal and important content, such as sex education materials, LGBTQ resources, or health information, to minimize their legal risk. They also maintain that the bill's supposed safeguards for encryption are wholly inadequate. Between these two positions is a more nuanced academic and policy perspective that has been suggested by scholars at institutions like the Brookings Institution and in the pages of the Harvard Law Review. This proposal seeks a third way that can hold platforms accountable without dismantling the core tenets of digital security and free expression. This approach often begins by invoking the long-standing legal principle of duty of care, which holds that a provider of a good or service has an obligation to anticipate and mitigate potential harms that may result from its use. The principle has been applied to new technologies for centuries and should, they argue, apply to AI companies today. Instead of focusing on content-based liability, which has a lot of First Amendment issues, this perspective suggests that focusing on process and transparency. Regulation could mandate that companies adhere to established risk management procedures, conduct thorough safety assessments before deploying new products, and be transparent about their training data and mitigation strategies. This approach also questions whether AI-generated content should receive the same robust First Amendment protections as human speech. Because generative AI tools lack human intent, belief, or autonomy, it's arguable that their output is not the kind of core expression the First Amendment was designed to protect. This opens the door for targeted, content-neutral regulations, such as mandatory watermarking to identify AI-generated content, or clear disclosures about a model's reliability. These could survive constitutional scrutiny while enhancing public safety. This approach attempts to move beyond the current legislative stalemate by focusing on creating enforceable standards of responsible behavior for tech companies, rather than forcing them into an impossible choice between liability and security. It recognizes the unintended consequences of well-intentioned laws and seeks a more durable and technologically informed solution. The death of Elijah Heacock was not an isolated tragedy, but a catastrophic system failure. It was the foreseeable result of a toxic convergence of powerful AI tools capable of creating hyper-realistic forgeries, the industrialization of cybercrime by organized, relentless networks, the exploitation of unique psychological vulnerabilities of adolescents, and a legal and regulatory framework created for a bygone technological era. This case showed the inadequacy of our collective response and has brought to attention to the general public the new inherent digital risk. The ultimate tribute to Elijah's life will be to ensure that the systemic failures that led to his death are comprehensively addressed. It is a collective responsibility to learn from this tragedy and to build a digital world that is fundamentally safer for everybody. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Make sure that you like and share this video. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. My username is The Spooky Lawyer. Go follow me on TikTok. My username is The Spooky Lawyer there as well. If there's a spooky or disturbing topic you would like me to research and do a video on, leave a comment. I read all my comments and respond to most of my comments. Or, if you're feeling shy, send me an email. My email address is thespookylawyer@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the channel and help fund making these videos, you can make a donation by clicking the Super Thanks button in the YouTube toolbar. Click it and you can make a donation. I would appreciate that. I'm going to put the names of all the people who've donated to this channel here. Thank you very much. If you donate to my channel, you will get your name in my videos. It's a very good deal. You also support me by liking, sharing, and watching my videos. And it means a lot to me that you watch my videos. And please stay spooky.